Hi everyone, how are you all? I hope you're all okay. I hope you're all safe and well, and I hope your families are all safe and well. Um, this PowerPoint is to give you some feedback on coursework 2. You will have quite extensive individual feedback on your courseworks when I release the link. And you will see that Juliana and I have set out for you what went well, what needed to be improved upon, and also what can be taken forward as you kind of go into the next stage of your degree, into the third year. So you've got quite comprehensive individual feedback. But for the purpose of right now, before you see your grades and the purpose of this PowerPoint, it's to go through just to reflect on what you were asked to do. Link back to the guidance that you were given. There was a whole PowerPoint presentation on Moodle for you to look at, and many of you did look at it, which was really good in terms of the structure. And it will also get you thinking maybe in terms of how you use your feedback. So what you'll get in terms of feedback here is some of the common themes that we all found, or that Juliana and I found across all the coursework, in terms of what was really good, because there was a lot that was really good. So well done, all of you. But also some common themes in terms of what could be improved. And I'd like to emphasize that if you use the feedback you receive from this piece of coursework and you pay it forward, pay it into your third year. You know, you're going to be doing equity and whatever your electives are in terms of your optional pieces of your optional modules. And if some of your feedback suggests that you might need to pay attention to referencing, or you might need to look at structure, or maybe analysis of case law and linking it back to the question, then do think about that. Do consider how you can improve your future work. Because for many of you who found yourselves maybe on a 58 or a 68, doing those things, making those small changes, is probably the difference between those grade boundaries. So it is absolutely important that you do look at your feedback and consider your feedback and try to use it. So this was your question. I'm not going to go over it in too much detail. Suffice to say that you were discussing and critically evaluating the current position on the importance of planning permission when assessing whether someone will be found liable in nuisance. And you had to make detailed and in-depth reference to case law and also reflect on academic opinion. This was your instructions and your guidance. Everyone gave me footnotes. Everyone included a bibliography. Very well done. And this, more importantly, was your criteria for assessment. And this was what was reflected on the marking rubric that was provided on the coursework. So you had to explain and illustrate the current law on nuisance, demonstrate an understanding of the approach to planning permission, provide analysis of Coventry and Lawrence, effectively use the skills of academic legal writing, legal research, correct legal terminology, and also effectively and correctly use footnotes and referencing for relevant case law. So I'm going to go on and just discuss this criteria for assessment in terms of what should have been the correct structure to use when answering that question. So in terms of explaining and illustrating the current law on nuisance, well, firstly, you had to set out and identify the issue. There were some brilliant introductions, so well done. You then had to go on and define nuisance and set out the elements of nuisance. And one of those elements was that interference was unreasonable. And this then provided an opportunity for you to set out all the factors that the courts consider in determining what is unreasonable. And from here, you could then identify the relevant factor for discussion. And the relevant factor, which you all know, was locality. Now, locality was the only factor that required discussion. Now, the other factors only needed to be mentioned briefly. No case law should have been discussed or mentioned for the other factors. It wasn't relevant. And actually, this point was made clear on the PowerPoint on coursework 2, which was put on Moodle. Then you had to illustrate the nature of locality using the case of Sturgis and Bridgman, which many of you did, so well done. Then turning to demonstrate an understanding of the approach to planning permission using relevant case law. Again, this was set out on the coursework guidance in the PowerPoint that was placed on Moodle shortly after we stopped face-to-face teaching. Gillingham and Medway was the most logical starting point in terms of planning permission changing the character of the neighbourhood because it was considered strategic. And here the nuisance claim was not successful because the nature of the locality was mixed commercial, which meant all of those individuals, those residents who were complaining and trying to bring a claim in nuisance, essentially had to put up with their locality being changed. Then Wheeler and Saunders, which distinguished Gillingham because the planning permission here in Wheeler was considered expansive and it hadn't altered the nature of the locality. Hunter, brief mention, concerned the redevelopment of London Docklands, and it provided an example of where the defendant was free to build on their land, which was subject to planning permission, showing how important the grant of planning permission was to a nuisance claim, or is to a nuisance claim. Then we continue. Watson and Croft was another case that considered planning permission, but the nature and locality of the area had not been changed. Therefore, the claim for nuisance succeeded. And then finally, Derrick Barr. And this was the instance where the defendants tried to argue that the permit was the same as planning permission, but the argument failed. The permit was not planning permission, it wasn't strategic, and it didn't alter the character of the neighbourhood. And more importantly, it didn't authorise the nuisance. So just going back, flicking back through these two slides, this was the case law that set out the history of the approach to planning permission before you got to the main event, as it were, which was the analysis of Coventry and Lawrence. So Coventry and Lawrence, I've started here, and again, this was guidance on the PowerPoint about coursework 2. Coventry and Lawrence on appeal, you then had the opportunity to set out the facts and decision at first instance, and then the issue and decision on appeal. Some of you started right at the trial and then went into the appeal and then went on to the Supreme Court. Again, that was absolutely fine because it provided the context. Coventry and Lawrence in the Supreme Court was the key issue and the key points that needed to be extracted from that case. And it was the in-depth analysis that we were looking for of Lord Neuberger's view, which considered 5 issues. And these were on slide 41 of the lecture slides for nuisance. Then you also had to effectively use the skills of academic legal writing, legal arguments, legal research, and also look at and include the accurate legal terminology. The question asked for academic opinion. Only 2 pieces of academic opinion were required. So that could have been a journal article, but also textbooks were also relevant. And in your conclusion, you were supposed to, in the conclusion, and it was really good that a number of you did do this really well. In the conclusion was about effectively summing up the current position relating to the importance of planning permission. It was not about introducing anything new. And when I say effectively use the skills of academic legal writing, this was something that we were looking at throughout your work. But in terms of structure and in terms of the criteria that we use for marking, this was obviously 2 areas that I can extract and use here as examples. You were also assessed in terms of effectively and correctly using footnotes and referencing for the relevant case law. So footnotes were used to reference case law, academic references and textbooks, which they were on the whole, so well done. And case names, in terms of being correctly used when you reference, case names should have been in italics in the main body of the essay and in the footnotes and also in the bibliography. So what went well? Well, overall, there was a really good use of the explanatory coursework 2 PowerPoint that was on Moodle, and the majority of you discussed the relevant case law, so really well done. And good footnotes. You gave me good footnotes, and on the whole, you gave me excellent bibliographies. If you have some feedback in terms of maybe tweaking how you use footnotes and also how you present your bibliographies, do please use them. In good answers, the relevant cases were analysed, and also you linked them in terms of understanding the issues concerning the nature of locality. So Gillingham, Wheeler, Watson and Croft, Derrick Barr, all of those were discussed and linked together quite nicely and showed the development of the law leading up to Coventry. And overall, I must say, both Juliana and I said that there is a good standard of academic writing across the majority of this work. So really well done. We don't underestimate what it took to produce this against the backdrop of the pandemic, not being able to have face-to-face access, and a number of you working in really difficult circumstances at home. So for those of you that walked away with an excellent grade or a very good grade, even a good grade, you should be very proud of yourselves. And also for those of you that passed and maybe didn't get the grades that you would have liked, give yourselves a pat on the back for actually submitting, okay? We don't underestimate the issues that you face to get this far. What could have been improved? In some instances, the analysis of case law needed to be linked back to the question. Otherwise, what ended up happening was that there was simply a list of cases that were being described. They weren't analysed, they weren't looked at in that way. It's also essential that you understand the legal principles from the relevant case law and why they are relevant. So, for example, for Gillingham, the issue was that planning permission was considered strategic, and that changed the nature of the locality. Some of you missed that point in terms of the relevance of discussing that case and also how it linked to Wheeler. So in Wheeler, Gillingham was distinguished because the planning permission there was said to be expansive. However, it was distinguished because in Gillingham, it was considered strategic. Now, as I've said, for some of you, referencing case law does need to be improved in terms, and also maybe in terms of how you correctly reference journals, etc. There is a guide that should be on the LLB Moodle page. However, if this is you, if in your individual feedback, or you know already that your referencing needs improving, please ask someone to sit down and go through it with you. Certainly, I can speak for those who will be taught by me next year for evidence and also the transnational course. I do place emphasis on good referencing, and I do go over little bits and pieces. So if that is something and you're unsure about how to do it correctly, you've maybe checked the LLB Moodle page, do come back to me if you need to, in terms of what you need to do and how you need to reference journals or case law correctly. And please do double check your work for spelling and grammar, okay? A lot of the work that cumulatively was maybe meant that your grade was a 68 and we couldn't necessarily move you on or find those 2 extra marks to move you up to a first. Some of that would have been around spelling and grammar and overall presentation, okay? It's not just about spell checking to make sure everything is spelt correctly. More importantly, it's about making sure that your sentences make sense. So do read back through your work and make sure, read it aloud. I always read my work aloud and just go back through it and make sure that what you're submitting in terms of your sentences, your arguments, make sure it all makes sense. But overall, well done, okay? Everyone did really well. I think the majority on the whole, everybody, maybe bar a couple of 1 or 2, passed. Many of you completed good, very good, or excellent pieces of work. And as I've said, we don't underestimate the difficult circumstances that you did complete this work in. It was clear that many of you had used the PowerPoint guidance for coursework too, and that was really, really good. It was there for a reason. Short of sending you all individual carrier pigeons with a message, I tried to get that point out there as much as I can, or as much as I could. And again, just to emphasize, if you've got feedback in terms of maybe, again, improving your referencing, improving citations, maybe improving your analysis, please try to use it in the next academic year, okay? That kind of feedback and implementing that feedback could be the difference between you jumping grade boundaries in terms of coursework, but also feeding that into your exams as well. All right, guys. Well, look, I didn't want to keep you too long. Hopefully this is nice and short and sweet. Please listen to it. Please take notice of it. And I will release the marks some point this week. And you can then obviously look at your individual feedback. Okay, but I'll email everyone when the marks are up. All right, stay safe and take care of yourselves.